Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe. I am excited to be joined by my friend Angelique Chengelis from the Detroit News, who covers Michigan ahead of this Iowa-Michigan Big Ten championship game rematch. Angelique, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thanks, John. And you know, Roger Federer just retired last weekend, so he's here too. He's here for the podcast.
Really impressed that he can make the trip, to Detroit already, and not moving at all in the background.
I know, big college football fan he is. Yeah. So he's really looking forward to this barn burner that we're going to see in Iowa City.
Well, let's start with Michigan's offense. It seems to be the matchup that's going to be Michigan's offense versus Iowa's defense. Iowa's familiar with Blake Corum a little bit from the Big Ten championship game, but McCarthy, what should Iowa fans expect to see from him?
Well, definitely a little bit of a different wrinkle with JJ, sophomore, who made his first career start in game 2, and now this is his first road start. So I'm curious to see how he adjusts to that, because Kinnick is, I've talked to Michigan players from way back, and they've all said that Kinnick is maybe the hardest place to play. I mean, they, Penn State with the whiteout, Ohio Stadium, of course, but Kinnick is, they talk about it and it's like they feel like they're lucky when they get out of there with a win because it's so brutal. So I'm curious to see how JJ does with that. But I think, you're going to see, I think they're going to, JJ had some issues last week. I mean, he fumbled twice. He didn't lose the fumbles. They were managed to recover those. He had a pick that the defender caught out of bounds. So he had some mistakes, some miscues. I think they have to, that's probably what they're working to tighten going into this game against this kind of defense that, as you know, really does take advantage of any team's mistakes. So I suspect Michigan will have a mistake or two. I do with a young quarterback, and that's not disparaging JJ. It's just, I think that kind of environment can rattle anybody. But I think you're going to see Blake Corum again, obviously doing what Blake Corum does. But I think Donovan Edwards missed the last 2 games, John, and I think he will be fine. I think he could have played last weekend. They wanted to rest his leg a little bit. So I think that they'll be able to have that 2-prong attack in the run game. And I think they'll probably try to control the ball that way more than having JJ kind of pull out some miracle throws.
And it's interesting that you bring up the turnovers, considering how night and day that's been for Iowa, where the 2 games where they were either tied or lost the turnover margin, they only outscored their opponents 14-13. And in the other 2 games, it was 54-10. So that tells you just how big holding on to the ball will be. And how much protection does Blake Corum get, or how much blocking is he going to get at the line of scrimmage? Michigan, obviously, with an award-winning offensive line last year. What should Iowa fans expect to see this year?
Well, I mean, that is a great question. And, I think it won the Joe Moore Award last year with 2 pieces missing now. But I think they definitely have an upgrade at center. And again, I don't say that to disparage Andrew Vastardis, who was a center last year, but Oluwatimi, the graduate transfer from Virginia, was a finalist for the Remington. He's been very good. Then they have a new right tackle in Trente Jones, who has taken a few licks. It's not been a perfect start for him as a starter. And in those early games when, they were bloating their scoring offense, I mean, they lead the nation, but I think everybody knows that against Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn, you and I could have probably scored a couple touchdowns. But, they left him in a lot. When they were taking out the starters, they left Trente in to get more game reps, get more experience. He does look like he's getting better. And on the left side, they've had some injury issues. Ryan Hayes, the starting left tackle, didn't make the first game start. He's back. But they did lose their 6th guy, and he could be back. Carson Barnhart, he's a guy who's very versatile, and I think he's actually a much more vital piece than people seem to think. And then Trevor Keegan, who has been their starting left guard, has missed the last couple games, and Jim Harbaugh's playing the little game. He could be probable, he could be questionable. It's no one knows exactly. So they have a young guy, a redshirt freshman Gio El Hadi, who's a local guy playing, and he's getting better with more reps. But you certainly want to see Trevor Keegan in there if you can, if you're Michigan. So the line's good. It's not as good as I think all of us were saying. Oh, with these additions, it's going to be Joe Moore Award team plus, and it hasn't been that yet. And they got to get better in pass protection. They've got to be better. And they lost Eric All. I mean, he hasn't been playing. It's been an unspecified injury, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be playing this weekend. And he's been pretty important to this too. So they're missing key pieces, but they should be getting at least Donovan Edwards back.
And then on the other side of the ball, obviously no Aiden Hutchinson, no David Ajabo. Iowa fans are probably breathing a deep sigh of relief at that, but still seems to be some people who can give you trouble, including Mozzie Smith, who Kirk Ferentz described as a refrigerator, except he can move. Just let that picture just sit in your head.
You've been seeing this big block with arms sticking out running. And that does, I think, that's a very good description of Mozzie. And I watched him a lot last week, John. I mean, he is definitely taking on double teams, and he was a little more effective. I think he was getting frustrated the first couple games, and it was in the first half, and Maryland had some momentum, and Michigan really hadn't been able to get to their quarterback. And finally, there was a tackle for loss. I think it was their first one in the game, and it was late in the first half, and it was Mozzie Smith and really kind of stifled them there. They did settle for a field goal, but he is definitely someone to watch. And I think there are a couple other guys like Chris Jenkins who can be up and down. I mean, I thought he would be someone who'd be really consistent force. He'll get there, I think. And but the pass rush is not, it's not what, as you described, it's not Hutchinson and Ojabo. And I don't know why anybody would have thought they could be replaced, because that was a lot of production, 25 sacks between them. And, you look at that first game against Colorado State, they had 7 sacks. Michigan had 7. Colorado State, I believe, is, at least I looked the other day, they're last in the country in sacks allowed. So again, I think you and I could have probably gotten a sack. And that is being disparaging. So I should stop, since I'm trying not to disparage anybody. But I think it's a work in progress. But what I've been surprised with Michigan's defense is their secondary, and they've played a lot better than I thought they would. And maybe one of the most impressive decisions Jim Harbaugh has made was moving Mike Sainristil, who'd been a receiver his first three seasons, to the defensive back. And he's been he had their first sack of the season. He got another sack the other day. I mean, he is really impressive, and a guy who's just all over the place, makes plays. And Junior Colson, their linebacker. Those are the guys I would watch if I were trying to tell someone from Iowa who would key in on.
And I think it'll be an interesting matchup too with that Michigan secondary against Spencer Petras, because Petras has been far from perfect. The last 2 games have looked better, but also you're going up against Nevada and Rutgers. Take whatever you want out of that you want. And he even against Rutgers, only found wide receivers 1 time for a 5-yard completion. So maybe some opportunities here for this Michigan secondary.
Well, and they really did come into this season with Steve Klinkscale, their coach, saying they have got to up the turnovers. And they had 2 big ones last week, 2 big interceptions. And, it is something that they're taking pride in and talking a lot about. And I mean, everyone is talking about Iowa's defense, and rightfully so. But I think Michigan can generate those kind of turnovers, and they can take advantage of them. They've had one defensive, they had a scoop and score. And did they have a touchdown return? I think they've had 1 or 2 defensive scores. I don't know why I'm blanking on the other one, but definitely the one. So not prolific like Iowa's defense. I saw you tweeted someone change the name of Iowa to IDWA. I thought that was pretty good.
That was really good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, because I think that's very fitting. And I love a great defense. I mean, I always have. And you go back to, it's the 25th anniversary of Michigan's 97 team that won the AP national title. And I mean, they had Charles Woodson, but that defense was tremendous. I mean, they had some big guys up front, and they would basket basketball, you hear it more in basketball, defense wins championships, but I mean, I'm always a big fan of it. So maybe it's not as sexy, but I think it's gonna be fun to watch how this defense approaches JJ McCarthy and these guys.
Oh yeah, and you look at it, Cooper DeJean, somebody who's had interceptions in his last 3 games, 3 interceptions in a 4-game stretch. That's a pretty impressive stat there. And I think people expected Riley Moss to be who Riley Moss is as Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. But having Cooper DeJean there is a different X factor there. And it's also especially needed depending on Terry Roberts' status. If he's out, maybe that's a little less depth there in the secondary for Iowa.
Well, and I told you before we started the podcast, we had a chance to speak with Matt Weiss on Wednesday. He's Michigan's co-offensive coordinator. He works with quarterbacks. And he was talking about Iowa's defensive personnel, and he singled out Cooper, thinking he could be the best of the group. And he had about 4 or 5 guys he thinks, and this is a guy who was on the Ravens staff, so he thinks a lot in terms of who can make that jump to the NFL. And he thinks that Cooper DeJean is I made it a softer J. DeJean is a guy who could really have an NFL future, and thinks he could very well be the best of the bunch here.
And incredible to think he's only a sophomore. So
it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have more of the same, I think. I think, that was one thing Harbaugh gave a little history lesson about Iowa's defense. I'm sure you saw the comments he was making Monday about the Parkers, and it's the Parker system. And, that is something that's going to be in place for a while. And but I think that they've been able to adjust with the times too. It's not like when you look at Wisconsin's offense, I don't think you see a lot of change in Wisconsin's offense, but I think you've seen Iowa's defense adjust when it's needed to adjust to these different offenses that the Hawkeyes face.
Oh yeah. When you bring up the lack of adjustments, that might bring up a sore spot for some people seeing the offense. So that's a different story. But the defense, when you have like the emergence of the cash position as basically their nickel safety, they've done the little things to be able to still keep up. And like at the combine last year is incredible how like the common theme I'd be hearing from players who played against Iowa is that what you're going to get, but it's just that well executed. So
that's the thing. I mean, like, people talk about, they should hide this or hide that. I mean, you look at Iowa their cards are on the table. They, what you're going to get, but they do it, like you said, so well, so fundamentally sound that they are going to beat you. I mean, that's, what we're doing, but we are going to be better at it. And I love that approach. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of it. And so I do. And we talked about predicted scores, and maybe we'll talk about that later, but I think this defense is really to be feared. And that's, again, not diminishing what Michigan's offense can do, because there is great potential there. I think you saw it in Indianapolis last year. Different quarterback, though. You had Hassan Haskins. You had those different pieces on the offensive line that they all gelled together. And so it's different personnel, but certainly capable with JJ McCarthy and his athleticism. But has he faced this? He hasn't yet, and he hasn't been on the road. I think that's another thing. It's going to be hard to communicate in there. I was asking a couple of players about that this week, and they talked about Nebraska last year, the night game, that they were literally next to each other, screaming at each other. And they suspect that's what will happen on Saturday at Kinnick.
Yeah, a sellout crowd, and the first time that they've played there since the north end zone renovation, I believe.
Well,
so that's
16,
made things.
I think of it as the upset in 2016 with that field goal, and that's the last time Michigan played there. And I believe Wilton Spate came out of there with his shoulder dinged up and wasn't quite fully healthy for the Ohio State game. So that Iowa game, Iowa has not treated Michigan very well their last 4 meetings.
Well, Michigan got the better hand in Indy last year, but for the most part there. And I think if it boils down to one matchup, I think it's going to be Blake Corum versus this Iowa defense.
Interesting. I look at it as JJ McCarthy. I think Blake Corum, he added 11 pounds in the offseason. He had 30 carries last week, which was not, they don't want their backs to carry the ball 30 times. I know. And he gets a little defensive when you ask him about, well, is it to be more durable? You added the weight, and he's like, I could always handle it. And yeah, he probably could. But then he finally sort of said, well, yeah, but the 11 pounds, that helps. And so I think that he's durable. And I think if you have Donovan Edwards there, that's going to give them a different option. I mean, he's a guy who can catch out of the backfield, and so can Blake, but that's more of Donovan's thing. I think JJ McCarthy, I started calling him Sunshine this week in my head, like, remember the Titans? He's just got this sort of like laid back, he's really competitive, but you just wonder if he has a pulse sometimes. So I'm really curious how he's going to look down and face this defense and what he can do against them.
Oh yeah, and you look at it, you see kind of both sides of quarterbacks who've gone into Kinnick and succeeded. Hunter Deckers a couple of weeks ago did pretty well, and then others not so much, where South Dakota State was rather proud of their quarterback, and Gronowski didn't have such a great day. Of course, JJ McCarthy is another level of athlete versus Mark Gronowski.
He is, but he is high risk, high reward too. And you don't want to be risky against this defense. So if they're going to attempt to pass, I want to see if they let him go. And I think that there was some thought last week. He did throw downfield a couple times. He overthrew Andrell Anthony. I thought Andrell slowed down on one of the routes, and so I wasn't putting it all on JJ, but he was like, it's the first time my shoulder felt really good. He missed all of spring ball because of the shoulder. And it was sort of like, I didn't realize my own strength kind of comment. But I think that they will unleash him. I think some of the conversations they've had, it almost makes it sound like he started thinking too much because they were telling him too many things. So I think they want JJ to be JJ, and JJ's a playmaker with his legs, with his arm. And, I think it'll be, I think he's up to the task, but he certainly hasn't faced a defense like this year, and probably won't the rest of the year.
And that's the other interesting dynamic about this game, is it's really both teams' toughest game of the year, because what was it? Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, and Maryland, I think, if I'm remembering right.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
And then Iowa had South Dakota State, which is a respectable FCS team, but still an FCS team, a down Iowa State team that they lost to, a really down Nevada team, and then Rutgers, which is Rutgers. So it's maybe a little bit of the first time to really see what each of these teams are capable of against kind of higher tier competition.
That's very fair. I think it's a really fair statement. And I just had this pop into my head. I had another former Michigan player text me the other day and referred to going to Kinnick as the Bermuda Triangle of college football. So it's like, I think there is just this sort of fear of going there too. And they certainly don't want to tell the current players about it. But when you talk to the guys who have played there, there was one guy I talked to, he was telling me that the way the stadium's designed, they're like, the fans seem like they're on top of you. And when he was playing, this would have been late 80s, he said the fans were like really educated on the players and saying all sorts of trash to them, and like specific trash designed to get in under their skin. And so with that in mind, I do think that obviously gives Iowa an edge there, but you're right. They both haven't been tested. Maybe their statistics are a little inflated by the competition they face. Certainly Michigan's offensive, they're scoring against those teams, 50 point games. But I think you see, at least you see on when you watch an Iowa game that the defense is pretty legit.
Yeah. And okay, maybe it won't look quite as dominant against Michigan, but you still have, at one point you had 3 NFL caliber linebackers. Now with Justin Jacobs out, you probably only have 2 NFL caliber linebackers. So only 2 there.
Only 2.
What essentially operates as a 4-2-5.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that. So that'll be an interesting matchup, to say the least.
I will say this too, John. I think, and maybe I'm overstating this, I think it is fortunate for Michigan the game is at 11 a.m. versus a night kickoff. I've been there when it's a night game, and I mean most stadiums at night are pretty they just take on a different level of being daunting. And I think that place, it suits Michigan better. And they've been playing, I think this is their yeah, I mean, it's their fourth noon game out of 5. I know you've had like all, primetime starts,
I was
but
gonna say that sounds like I'm jealous of that. All those noon starts, like you
well,
don't have
both
to be
of us,
writing at 4 a.m.
well, we've both had weather delays for night games, haven't we? Yeah, because Hawaii was delayed an hour, so I
Oh
got
yeah,
out
I
of there at
forgot
3.
about that.
Yeah, so but not quite as bad as yours. And I know I told you this when you had the Lightning game and kept going and going for Iowa. I went to sleep and I woke up it was probably 2:30 Detroit time. And I checked Twitter because that's what you do when you wake up in the middle of the night. And you were like tweeting from the press conference. I said, wow. So that's crazy.
So I don't think we'll have. My prediction is 0 lightning delays
Okay, good.
for this game.
Now you've jinxed
considering
it.
it's
Way to go.
all sunny.
Way to go.
So if I jinx it, you can all blame me.
Okay,
Send
good.
all the hate notes to the Gazette, and they'll eventually get to me. So
I'm excited though too, John, and I wrote about it today. The Iowa Wave. I mean, I just love that kind of stuff, and I've gone with the Michigan players to the Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor when they pre-pandemic when they would visit, and you see the little kids light up. And so I wrote a little story, and I know it's different now post-pandemic. It's not as many kids in the press box cafe. But I did talk to JJ McCarthy about it, who last year donated like $11,000 to, he has a foundation for kids. Most of it goes to the Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor and in Chicago near his home. But he also made donations to all the hospitals on the road for at Michigan State, he made a donation, Maryland. And he said he's going to have a special one for the Iowa Children's Hospital. But he was like genuinely enthusiastic, couldn't wait to be able to participate in the wave. And I think, do people in the press box wave?
they do not. So people in the TV booth do. So this probably makes us writers seem all like jerks as I say
I'm gonna
this.
wave. I'm gonna
That like I never dawned on me that wait a second, nobody in the press box does wave. So
I'm like, they're in the press box cafe. Do we wave from press box to press box?
like elevation wise, it's probably pretty similar.
Yeah, I would think so. But I'm really excited about that. I really am. And maybe it makes me sound like a softie, but I guess I am.
Well, it's interesting because you see a lot of the opposing teams get into it. And I think the team that's gotten into it the most is Minnesota. Like,
oh, wow.
They will like run because like where you are with the visiting sideline, you can kind of get a good angle at the hospital.
Yeah.
But if you step a little bit into the field, you get a better angle.
Mm-hmm.
As I go back to geometry. So I should have been thanking my geometry teacher in 10th grade for this. But like the Minnesota players, like it seemed like you blinked and they were already like a third of the way across the field to be able to be in prime waving position.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat.
It's one of the things too that like when I'm visiting family from outside of Iowa, extended family, like it's one of the first things that people connect with when they hear Iowa football. So
isn't that nice? That's a really nice thing to be connected to. I mean, it's like Wisconsin with jump around, but that's different. I mean, you're doing something for these little kids in the hospital. And when I spoke to Emily Baxter at the Iowa hospital, she was saying that like literally everybody stops and waves, security guards around the stadium. I mean, everybody does it. And but of course the reporters don't, so that's got to change on Saturday.
This is gonna be the start of the change of the tradition.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, on a less heartfelt note, do you have a score prediction?
I do. I wrote it down. 17-13. I have Michigan winning.
I have Michigan winning as well, 24-10. So a little less faith in the Iowa offense.
We didn't talk about special teams. I mean,
How did we forget this with two of the best special teams?
They're both are really good.
Yeah. Michigan has an All-American kicker.
Yeah, I mean the Groza Award winner, but they've blocked a punt this year. They had the ball bounced off the Maryland kid on the opening kickoff, and Michigan recovered it. So they've been kind of the Iowa defense taking advantage of those kind of miscues and really doing a really good job on it. But I was asking Jay Harbaugh, who coordinates Michigan special teams, about Iowa's punter, and he was just like beside himself, raving about what kind of athlete he is. So that's gonna be really, I think that this kind of game comes down to something like that.
Oh yeah, and it's like special teams connoisseurs in Iowa City are kind of spoiled these 2 weeks, because last week was the punt-a-thon, as I was calling it, because it was Torrey Taylor against Adam Korsak, who, okay, maybe two of the best punters in college football. And now you have another really well-coached special teams unit with Michigan coming in. And Iowa, I think it's been now 3 of the last 4 weeks they've had the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week.
Is that right? I didn't notice. And Michigan's got a really good punter in Brad Robbins, and he and Jake Moody, the kicker, came back. They had, they used their extra year, and he's really good. And both of them are, we're talking about the hospital wave. I mean, both of them are kicking for different cancer charities. So that's been kind of cool what they've been doing. But, I think what made Jake Moody so good last year is that their red zone off. I mean, they just were not great in the red zone early. I mean, they'd go probably through the Michigan State game last year, maybe Nebraska, and he had a lot of big kicks. And he hasn't had that kind of work this year, but that doesn't mean he's any less imposing. But I think,
and if there's a game where you're going to have a lot of kicks, this seems to be the likely one against this Iowa defense, and this Iowa offense in general is going to be relying on a lot of field goals just based on their own challenges with the red zone. I forgot what exactly their rank is in red zone offense, but I was looking at it the other day, and I believe is sub 100 by a good extent there, like they are in so many other offensive stats. So
yeah, I know. I mean, I look at those stats and I'm like, gosh, that's, not very, but the defense has definitely covered up some of those blemishes. And I was also looking at Michigan's third downs this season. They have not been all that efficient. And the other thing that they did last year when they had their terrific run is it was like, I looked eight regular seasons game, 8 of the regular season games, they came out in the second half and scored right away on their first series. And last week when they had a chance they'd scored with 22 seconds left before halftime against Maryland. They had a chance coming out of halftime to score, and they just got real conservative. And I think it's important if you're going to kind of step on an opponent to come out in the second half, and they haven't. And so I think that there's definitely some flaws there in Michigan's offense. So I don't want to pile on Iowa, because I think Michigan, even though the statistics are gaudy, I think when you look a little bit underneath it all, there are definitely some issues. Not glaring, but some.
And isn't it also interesting with the Michigan situation with the 2 offensive coordinators? I think it was the TV commentators were saying something about, okay, but who has the final call on this?
I have been asking Jim Harbaugh this since the spring, and I asked him this. Yeah, it was definitely spring ball, and he starts rattling off, like he starts naming. He kept saying it's collaborative, and I'm like, well, what do you mean exactly by collaborative? And he starts naming every offensive coach on the staff, and I said, yeah, I know who's on your staff. I said, who's calling plays? And he's like, oh, you want to know who's calling plays? I'm like, yes, that's what I want to know. And they don't really tell you. And I think that there's some perception here that Matt Weiss calls the plays. I think it's Sharon Moore who's calling the ball. I think you've got Matt Weiss, who was the analytics guy with the Ravens. I think he's doing more of like third down calls. I think that they're collaborating that way. And I don't know. I mean, I get Harbaugh said earlier in the year, he doesn't like that cliche. If you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. And because his point was, well, Michigan has two really good quarterbacks. I think if you have two coordinators, you don't have one. And I think I've just always believed you got to have one guy. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's too many cooks in the kitchen. So that's my piece. And Joel Klatt sounded like he sort of had a similar, no one was answering him on this.
Which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. Like, Iowa fans aren't crazy about the person who is calling the plays, but at least you have a clear person who's able to make that decision.
Right.
Well, mostly make that decision, maybe with Kirk stepping in here and there on big decisions, but
which is fair. I mean, the head coach can do that. So,
but yeah, it's an interesting, and that was one of the routes that I think a lot of people would have maybe wanted Iowa to go, would be to have two co-offensive coordinators.
That's because they don't like the one who's the
pretty
primary.
Much. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So I get it. But I mean, I just think it makes it very convoluted. And I don't know. I mean, they game plan all week. They have a run game coordinator. They also, they get their game plan ready. But it's when you try to ask either one of them, Stromore or Matt Weiss, they just won't play. They won't play the game and they won't tell you anything. So that's my hunch. People have different feelings about it, but I think Stromore is the primary play caller and Matt Weiss is not. Then he comes in on third down and when they use analytics, he's the guy.
Which there are benefits to having analytically based offenses and such. Some of these words might be foreign concepts in Iowa's offense in terms of being a little more traditional, run the ball, establish the run, etc., and then go based on that rather than kind of the money ball style. But we'll see the two styles clash on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing you, and I'm looking forward to the wave. Really looking forward to the wave. That's but and I love the Bluebird Cafe. So that's what I want to make my little stops in Iowa City that I like. Cause I think it's a really nice place to visit.
Oh yeah. I brag all the time about Iowa City to my friends. So
it's great. And the one time I drove, I think I got kind of lost and I drove behind the campus, I think where the art school is. And it's there's a change in topography. I'm like, wait, there's hills here. I mean, it was really pretty. So no, I really enjoy going there.
So Iowa, not as flat as you think.
Not at all. Not at all. And very fun. So
yes. Well, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And I look forward to doing this, I hope, next year.
Yes, based on whatever the schedule is. And thanks to our listeners for tuning into another episode of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. Mike and I will be back with another edition of Hawk Off the Press after the final score, after Saturday's game.
Hawk Off the Press. I do love that.
Thank you.
It's very clever.
Thank you. I wish I could take credit. It was before my time, but I'll still go ahead and take credit.
You should.
But we'll be back with another episode Saturday after the game. Until then, we will talk Hawks later.